Hello everyone and welcome to our special series about the 2025 Annual Town Meeting. This series is designed to help inform residents about issues that are important to the town. Each segment is about a specific article or group of articles, so make sure you check in to find the issue that's important to you or to learn about all of the issues our town is facing. The next segment in our series about the 2025 Annual Town Meeting addresses a new Town Administrator Bylaw. In order to discuss this topic, I'm going to turn it over to the Chair of the Select Board, Travis Snell.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Travis Snell. I'm actually the Chair of the Carlisle Select Board. And today I wanted to talk about the Town Administrator Bylaw that will be on the warrant for the town meeting. I've asked Tim Downing, who's a resident. Tim, how long have you been in Carlisle?
I've been here, used to be the new guy in town, but I've been here 18 years, so yeah. Feel like I've been here a bit, and of course we love the town.
Yeah.
Happy to be here today.
Yeah, so I thought I'd have you as just a resident and voter and citizen ask me some more about the Town Administrator Bylaw, because what we're trying to do is to educate the residents and voters in Carlisle, and hopefully we can do that this morning. So
Perfect.
Yeah. So I thought I'd just begin by telling a little bit about the bylaw itself. So the bylaw is a change to how the roles and responsibilities of the town administrator. Currently, the town administrator, the authority comes from the state legislature down to the select board. It goes to the town. It actually resides with the voters. The executive authority is with the select board in the town of Carlisle. And we have appointed a town administrator, and the administrator is, in theory, responsible for the employees of the town and administrating and making sure that our policies are followed. The policies are dictated by the boards and committees. They come in and set policy, and then we have an administrator who administrates that. I guess the challenge has been with the town administrator bylaw, or the lack of it, is that the town administrator really doesn't have defined roles and responsibilities. And we have a personnel policy in town, so that all the employees in theory will follow that. But we have a challenge with our structure, because we have these daytime employees who come in every day. They're paid by the town and they work throughout the day. And then we have evening volunteers who, some boards meet during the day, but most meet in the evening, once or twice a month, or whatever is needed. And they actually have the responsibility currently of managing the employees, which is something I wasn't really aware of when I was on the Zoning Board of Appeals for a number of years, and now in the Select Board. And the challenge comes because if you're in a department, for example, if you're working in the planning board or the Board of Health, in theory, you're reporting directly to that board, those volunteers, and they're responsible for your day-to-day activities. And so the board is actually responsible for administrating the personnel policy. So as an example, if you are an employee and you come in late to work repeatedly, the only person really responsible for administrating and to discipline and so forth is the board itself. But the board meets on in the evenings, and so they're not really aware of when and things like the day-to-day policies. So what we're trying to do is really institute a stronger human resource policy. And that's through this town administrator bylaw policy, which basically gives the authority of the town administrator to the town administrator to run the HR of the town. Now, we have excluded some organizations in town. We've excluded the school, because the school has its own school committee, and that's actually by statute, state statute drives that. We've excluded the fire department, because the fire department has, even though the select board does appoint the fire chief, the chief has his own staff of employees, and the chief is there every day, and we think is the person who should be running it, and that's by statute as well, the state statute. And then the last exclusion to this really is the library, because we think the library, like the fire department, has its own facility, it has its own director, it has a board of trustees, and we've looked, and by state statute, that is the way it's run as well. So we think that those three should be excluded from this. But other than that, we want to get everyone under the same kind of personnel bylaw. And that's kind of the purpose of this TA bylaw.
Is geography a part of it, Travis? I mean, I think about the school, which makes complete sense. First of all, it's a much more complex organism, the school itself. And then the library, it's a separate geographic organism, and then the fire department. Whereas it seems like the town administrator might be more focused geographically on the town hall and the sort of administrative things that happen in this building. I mean, probably the Department of Public Works might fall underneath that, Gary and his team.
Yeah. Well, Gary's retired. It's now Jim Hall.
Oh, well, thank you for that.
Yeah, well, but you're right. Geography has something to do with it. It's also in thinking about the structuring of the town. If you're in this single facility and you have employees that all work together, having a central person in charge of those employees is important. As an example of something, and I used the example already about if you come in late to work, you really, it's great. If you work for a department that is an elected board that meets once or twice a month, you can have free reign to do what you want. So it's great to work under those. Now, I'm not saying that is the case, because we know that in Carlisle and in most places, people are hardworking and do their job. But there are instances when things come up. We've had cases of harassment within town departments. And so you have employees. I mean, this is an organization. So you have all sorts of employees with different viewpoints. And so if there's a heated issue of harassment between one employee and another, typically you have an authority, a central authority, and we do have that. We have policies and procedures in place, and we have a professional manager, a town administrator, as well as an assistant town administrator, who are actually professionals who handle that. But the challenge comes when you have the department, if it's an elected board, that has a person who has a claim, one of their employees has a claim against them, and another department has another claim, you really don't have a central set of authority. And so the town administrator then has to go to that board and has to hold a public meeting. Now, per the personnel policy, the employee who's accused can say, well, I'll have it in executive session, or I can do it publicly. But even in executive session, all of that is recorded. And so it really creates a situation where we have such a public policy for handling personnel matters that it becomes difficult to enforce that, because a lot of people don't want to come forward if it's going to be taken to very publicly. But so
that makes total sense, Travis. It all makes sense. I'm curious what precipitated this. I mean, it seems like you've acknowledged that there's a problem. Why now? Why is it kind of coming forward now? Is it that there's an awareness that there's a problem? People on the select board said, hey, I know that we also, I sort of was a little bit behind with Gary, and I apologize to Gary for that, as well as the new head of the Department of Public Works. But, I know we also recently have a new town administrator, correct?
Correct. Well, it's 3 years old.
3 years,
He just got a new contract. It was just elected, so he'll be here another 3 years.
And so, I sort of read in the Mosquito his, when he was kind of onboarded, his enthusiasm for the job. And I'm curious what kind of brought the kind of change, this awareness that, hey, maybe we can do things better. Is it more from the town administrator or the select board, or what sort of made this happen?
Right. Well, it started, I've been on the select board 3 years, but it started even prior to that. There have been challenges in town. There always. You're dealing with a multi-person organization, and there are always different competing interests. And what has happened in the past, we had some challenges, And at town meeting, there was an article, a warrant article, and I believe it was back in 2021, to have a task force. And it was called the Town Governance Task Force. And this was kind of an independent board or task force put together by the town moderator at town meeting, who put this together to really understand what are really the problems going on in town government, because we had some dysfunction. And they came back with a report, which is online and you can read, but one of the things the recommendations they came back with, their first number 1A recommendation was to strengthen the authority of the town administrator. And during the process, they noted the difficulties that the volunteer boards had and committees had in exercising control and oversight. And again, their observation was this daytime, nighttime disconnect, because you had, the people want these services, but these volunteers are actually running the employees and they're not around to really run them. And so they had suggested, this task force suggested to really have a bylaw that strengthens and codifies, really explains what's the authority of the town administrator. So that's been the genesis of it. And then as we've worked as a select board, we've brought on a new town administrator. The town administrator expressed to us, he said, I've come in, I've read through all of your policies, I've read through all this, but I really don't know, it doesn't give me much authority.
Yeah.
There's nothing here that says I have the ability to manage these employees. And so we think that that's going to be helpful to the town, and not just from an HR standpoint. And I do have to say that on the human resources, this is a human resource bylaw. And in the language, and I'll just read it here, it says that this is from the warrant article, the town administrator is not a policy creating position and shall not have the authority to create or set policy independent of the select board approval or authorization, nor may they do so on behalf of other town officials or multiple member bodies, meaning the town administrator, this is not about setting policy. So this is about HR and also having a streamlined sense of authority. Because one of the other things that we've observed, and I think the FinCom, the Finance Committee, has observed, is that one of the challenges we have as a town is we want to offer all these services, but we have very siloed departments. So they have these different, and if you're in this one department and you're the board of that department, you're going to hire all your employees. You're going to say, okay, we're managing these employees. But the challenge becomes, as we get tighter and tighter in our budgets, and when we look at how best to manage this as an entire town, it may make sense to have one of the administrators who is doing something for one of the departments. So if they're I'm trying to think of a title, but they're not the head of a department, but they're one of the people who is greeting the public and helping find records or whatever it might be. If they can shift over and be more flexible with other departments, we can actually, have an ability to be a more nimble town.
So that could be one of the responsibilities of the administrator, to see those efficiencies and take advantage of them potentially?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that's one of the things that we think could come out of this as well.
Not just a typical problem solver, but someone who can be proactive about integrating the different parts of our town government.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Travis, I'm curious, what do I'm sure that, there are plenty of towns that have different structures than Carlisle, plenty of towns that have very similar structures as Carlisle. How do they handle this issue? Is this something that we see other towns doing?
Yeah. Well, we've looked at that, and it's really all over the map. Truly, we have 351 towns, and they all function a little bit differently. And it's because, thank goodness, we all get to choose how we want to structure our own government locally. And so some towns operate completely differently. Our neighboring town that we share a joint school system with, Concord, they function with just 2 elected boards. So they have the select board and the school board, and that's it. And everything else is appointed. So they don't elect the planning board. They don't elect the board of health. They don't elect the assessors. So it runs completely different, or not completely, but differently. And some would say, well, they have a town manager, and the difference between a town manager and a town administrator is really somewhat semantic, because there is no defined difference. We've come to evaluate it as saying, well, if you're a town manager, you have more authority. But that's not necessarily the case when you read through and look at other town bylaws and see what does the town manager, what does the town administrator have authority over. And so the same is true, to answer your question, with all of these towns. So we look at Concord, but you can look at somebody like Stowe or Harvard, and we have different things. I just need to pull out my notes because, so let me, on Stowe is a charter town, which is kind of what we are looking to do, where the TA appoints all the employees except the police chief and the fire chief, and the library's trustees appoint their director, but they've delegated their authority of the director to the town administrator. Whereas a town like Harvard, their board of health is appointed by the select board, but the personnel board advises the select board on hiring. We had a personnel board years ago as a town, but it just didn't really function very well, and we've subsequently eliminated it years ago. But all the hiring is done by the town administrator, except the school and the library in Harvard. Groton has a town manager that can remove department heads, but it needs a confirmed vote from the select board to remove them. And so each of them, and we heard recently, we've done a lot of outreach to other boards and committees. The Board of Health in particular had some regional expertise. They have a regional Board of Health advisor that came in and spoke to the select board and said, Belmont went through this same process and they enacted a town administrator bylaw, but in the process they carved out the Board of Health, and they have a few carve-outs as well. So everybody's trying to kind of work their way and figure out what works best for their town. And this is what the select board kind of arrived at.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is the police, we haven't talked about the police department in terms of these, like, there's a school's independent library and fire department. What about the police? The police included under the town administrator's purview? So
yes, the police chief is actually hired by the select board. It has to be appointed by the select board. But the department is actually run by the police chief. But overall, that's overseen by the town administrator. So the town administrator does have that authority. Right. But the carve-outs, again, in this town administrator bylaw are that the select board shall appoint and may remove a police chief, a fire chief, a town clerk, town treasurer / tax collector, and town council, and provided further that employees of the Carlisle Public Schools, Fire Department, and Gleason Public Library shall be appointed, removed, and managed by the school committee or superintendent, fire chief, or Gleason Public Library trustees or director, respectively.
Got it.
Yeah.
Travis, it all sounds great. What's the downside? Why wouldn't we immediately support this initiative?
Yeah. Well, we've reached out. There are a couple of boards that, one in particular, who thinks, this is a sort of a power grab. That's how they view it, and say, we need to be independent, because if we're going to set policy, and if we're going to do, and you'll hear this, and it's not secret, it's been out, but the Board of Health is one that has said strongly, we just don't think that this is a good policy. Their objections are that because they're setting health policy, they need to be completely independent and have no oversight or authority from the select board. And we've looked at that and said, as I mentioned, other towns appoint their boards of health and have town administrators run the staffing of those. So it's not unusual. It's not, automatic that should be the case. But we think that having, a personnel policy, we made it very clear, because we did listen to these concerns, and we made it very clear to say in this that in the supervisory and managerial capacity, the town administrator shall ensure efficient operation of the town's implementing the town's policy and directives, but it makes clear that this is not a policy creating position and shall not have the authority to create or set policy independent of the select board approval or authorization, nor may they do so on behalf of other town officials or multiple member bodies. Multiple member bodies. So that is saying to the Board of Health or to other boards within town or committees, the select board is not trying to take away your authority. We are not trying to take away your policy-making authority. In fact, that's what we think this bylaw does, is that it's going to give you better time so that you're not focused on managing the personnel within your department, of which you show up, once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, and say, oh, by the way, we've got to deal with personnel issues. No, we're taking that away, but we're saying you focus on your policy, whatever that is. If it's planning, you're focusing on planning. If it's the CONSCOM, you're focused on Wetland Protection Act and doing those things. Whereas we're going to have one kind of policy for the town, and so we're going to get you those resources. So the question that I might ask on top of that is, well, what if you don't get the resources, right? So what if the town administrator says, you know what, I don't think you need all these resources. And if the department, and we'll use the Board of Health on this example, if the Board of Health staffing were to change and somehow the people said, oh my gosh, I can't get my permits, this doesn't work, the question that I'm concerned about on the select board and really as a resident and as a citizen is, I don't want anyone to have too much power and authority, and you've got to have a check on that power. So the question is, what's the check on this, so that if you had a situation where those things weren't getting done, what would happen, I think, Tim, is that if you said, gosh, I'm not getting the septic permits, this thing is not working, and I'm using that as an example, for example, the Board of Health. If that happened, as a select board, everyone would start petitioning. That board, the Board of Health, would petition the select board and say, listen, we can't do our jobs. We're not getting the resources. And that would percolate up. It would percolate up publicly, I'm sure, through the mosquito and all the social media and everything else. And as elected representatives, we would take that feedback and we would immediately go to the town administrator and say, hey, it's not getting done. We need it to get done. And so that is kind of what I think is a reasonable check. But at the same time, we're really moving towards a more professional management of this. Okay.
And the ultimate authority over the town administrator in terms of this new role would be the select board, correct?
Correct. The select board is the appointing and firing authority of the town administrator. And again, it's not about setting policy for the various departments. This is about creating a consistent HR policy that is consistently administered for the employees that it includes, which basically includes most all town employees. It's similar to what the school committee has. The school committee has a superintendent. The superintendent is in charge of the school. Now, granted, there are union contracts and so forth, but that person has been tasked with that role. We're doing the same, would like to do the same type of thing with town, and we think it'll be more efficient. So that's it. Any other questions?
No, Travis, that's been very, very helpful. I really got some good information. Thank you.
You're welcome. Tim, thanks for coming in, and thank you for listening. Hope you turn out to May 18th to town meeting.